If your garden always looks worse in July than it did in June, despite watering more, checking more, worrying more, there is a very specific reason for that. And it is almost certainly not the reason you think. July is the month that exposes gardeners who are doing everything right. Not because they are doing anything wrong, because they are doing the right things in response to the wrong problem. They see a wilting plant and water it. They see flowers dropping and water more. They check the soil surface, find it dry, and water again. The garden keeps declining. They water more. And somewhere around the third week of July, they quietly conclude that this is just what summer does and there is nothing much to do about it. That conclusion is understandable. It is also wrong. And the cost of believing it is 4 to 6 weeks of a garden that should be at its most productive, running at a fraction of what it could produce. What makes July particularly frustrating is that the decline almost never looks dramatic at first. It is gradual. A little more wilting than last week. Slightly fewer flowers opening. Fruit that seems to have stopped developing. Each individual symptom, taken alone, seems manageable. But by the time the full picture is visible, a significant portion of the season's productive window has already closed. July does not announce itself as a problem until it has already become one. Here is the actual problem. The watering you are doing right now may be making things worse, not better. Not because you are overwatering in the traditional sense, because you are pouring water into a delivery system that the heat has already compromised, and more water cannot fix a problem that is not caused by thirst. That is the thing almost nobody explains about July. The wilting you are watching each morning is not a water shortage. It is a transport failure. There is a difference. And once you understand it, everything about how you manage a summer garden changes. I want to show you exactly what is happening. Underground first, then above ground. Because the two mechanisms work together, and understanding both is what separates a July garden that collapses from one that keeps producing straight through summer. Before the mechanism, let me show you why the explanations most gardeners try first do not hold up. Because without clearing those out, the real answer does not fully land. The heat is the obvious first suspect. July is brutal, and plants visibly struggle. That sounds like a complete explanation. Except if the heat itself were the cause, every garden in the same neighborhood would collapse at the same rate. They do not. Some gardens sail through July in the same weather that defeats others nearby. The heat is present in both. It is not the variable that explains the difference. The second conclusion is that they are not watering enough, so they water more. Add an evening session. Check the surface more often. The garden continues declining. Some of them notice, without quite saying it out loud, that heavier watering seems to make things worse rather than better. They assume they are still not doing enough. They water more again. The soil gets blamed next. Something must have changed or depleted. But the soil that produced well in May has not been replaced. Nothing in the bed itself changed between June and July. And then the most defeating conclusion of all. Some gardeners quietly decide that they simply do not have the talent for summer gardening. Other people have better instincts, better land, better luck. They lower their expectations for July every year and wait for September. That conclusion is wrong, but without knowing what is actually causing the collapse, there is no reason to believe otherwise. None of these explanations account for the gap. The real answer starts underground. When was the last time you checked what your soil temperature actually is in July? Not the air, the soil itself, 6 inches down? Most gardeners never do. The air temperature in July feels like the whole story. It is not even close to the whole story. Soil in full sun in July can reach temperatures that would genuinely alarm you. Not because they feel extreme to the touch, but because of what they are quietly doing to every root system living inside that soil. Plant roots have a functional range. Inside that range, they do their job efficiently. Above it, they do not stop working immediately. They degrade. The function that moves water from the soil up through the stem and out to every leaf and fruit becomes slower, less efficient, increasingly compromised. The roots are present. The water is present. The connection between them is breaking down. This is the transport failure. The plant is wilting, not because the soil is dry, but because the roots can no longer move what is there fast enough to keep up with what the heat is demanding from the leaves above. You go out and water more heavily. The water sits in hot soil that the roots are already struggling to work with, and the plant wilts again the next morning. The harder truth is this. In compacted, heat-saturated soil, heavy watering can reduce the oxygen available to roots that are already under stress. The instinct is correct. The plant looks like it needs water, but the instinct is responding to a symptom, not the cause. More water cannot solve a problem that is not caused by thirst. This is why 2 inches of mulch applied before a heat wave does more useful work than an extra week of heavy watering after one. Not only because mulch holds moisture, it does, but because it keeps the soil temperature low enough for roots to keep functioning at all. The mulch is not solving a moisture problem. It is protecting a delivery system. Quick question before we go further. What does your July garden usually look like by mid-month? Drop your growing zone in the comments. I read every one. Root stress is the first mechanism. The second one operates above ground, and when it combines with root stress, it is what actually collapses a July garden. Here is something strange. A plant can be completely surrounded by water and still act like it is starving. Water it every morning. The soil is visibly damp an inch down, and the plant still drops its flowers, refuses to push new fruit, looks worse every day, and suddenly becomes vulnerable to every pest and disease that approaches it. That is not a watering problem. Something else entirely is happening. Under sustained heat, not a single hot afternoon, but days stacking on each other, plants close down the pores on their leaves that they use to breathe and photosynthesize. This is a survival response to reduce water loss, and in the short term, it works exactly as intended. The problem is what happens when a plant holds this response for days at a time. A plant running in survival mode has switched off its productive systems. It stops channeling energy toward new fruit. It stops pushing flower buds. It stops investing in growth. It stops producing the compounds that normally defend it against the disease spores and pest populations that are always present in a summer garden, waiting for exactly this moment. July does not usually kill plants. It convinces them to stop growing. And here is what makes the 2 mechanisms so damaging together. The productive shutdown is triggered faster and held longer in plants that are already under root stress. Roots that cannot move water efficiently push the plant toward its stress threshold sooner. The plant shuts down its productive systems earlier. Once in shutdown, its defenses drop. The pests and disease that couldn't get a foothold in a healthy plant move-in, the blossom drop you are seeing is not one problem. The tomatoes not setting fruit is not a second problem. The sudden aphid population is not a third. These are all the same event, a plant in survival mode, expressing itself in 3 different places simultaneously. Treating them as separate issues with separate solutions is why most gardeners spend July firefighting and still lose ground. More water cannot solve a problem that is not caused by thirst. That is worth repeating because it is the thing most gardeners are currently doing, and it is the thing most likely to make July worse rather than better. Quick check. If I walked into your garden right now and asked you the soil temperature 6 inches down, could you tell me? Most gardeners cannot. That single number tells you whether your plants are in productive mode or survival mode more accurately than any visual inspection. A soil thermometer pushed into the ground near your most heat-sensitive plants, once a week through summer, gives you information that an hour of walking around looking at leaves never will. One more thing about visual inspection before we get to what actually works. Walk your garden at noon in July and you will diagnose problems that do not exist. A plant that looks genuinely stressed and desperate at midday, drooping, dull, worrying to look at, can look completely normal again 2 hours after sunset, with nothing done to it at all. Midday wilting in July is frequently a temporary protective response to peak heat. The gardener who waters heavily in response to a noon inspection is often solving a problem that would have resolved itself by evening, while accidentally creating root stress underground. Walk the garden early morning or just after sunset. That is when you are seeing the actual state of your plants, not their heat response. Now here's what to do. And the order in which to do it matters as much as the actions themselves. For root stress, timing is everything. 2 inches of mulch applied before a heat wave does real work. The same mulch applied after 3 days of peak heat is doing less than half the job, because mulch regulates soil temperature far more effectively than it reverses it. Once the soil has absorbed several days of direct heat, the damage to root function has already begun. Top up your mulch now, before the next stretch of heat arrives, not during it and not after. Wood chips, straw, shredded leaves. The material is less important than the depth and the timing. Watering frequency needs to go down. Duration needs to go up. What you are changing is root behavior. Frequent shallow watering teaches roots to stay near the surface, where soil temperature is highest and where a single hot, dry day can strip available moisture completely. Long, infrequent sessions push moisture deeper and train roots to follow it. Down into soil layers where temperature is lower, moisture is more stable, and root function holds longer under heat pressure. After your next deep watering session, push a trowel in and check. If the soil is dry past 3 inches, the session was not long enough. The garden that appears to get away with less frequent watering is not an exception or a lucky accident. It has deeper roots. Deeper roots happened because of how it was watered. For the productive shutdown, timing of feeding matters more than most people realize. A plant in survival mode has downregulated its entire system. Feeding it at midday, when capacity is lowest, is largely wasted. The only window that reliably works in July is early morning, before the heat rises, while the plant is still in its most active state after the overnight rest. Same fertilizer, same quantity, applied in the morning instead of midday, reaches a plant that can actually use what it receives. This sounds like a small adjustment. The difference in plant response is not small. Shade cloth is worth using, but placement matters more than coverage. Full overhead coverage reduces light as well as temperature, which can push a plant that has already slowed its photosynthesis into an even lower state. Afternoon shade on the west-facing side of your most heat-sensitive plants. Tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, while leaving morning light unobstructed gives you temperature protection without sacrificing the light plants need to restart productivity. 1 piece of shade cloth, placed correctly, does more than 3 pieces placed over the top. There is also a timing consideration with shade that most people miss. Deploying shade cloth in the middle of a heat wave, when the plant is already in survival mode, helps slow the decline but does not reverse it quickly. The plants that recover fastest from heat events are the ones that had protection in place before the event started. This is the same principle as the mulch. Prevention in July costs minutes. Repair costs weeks. Here is the one action worth doing today, before anything else. Check your mulch depth. If it is less than 2 inches around your most heat-sensitive plants, add more before the next heat stretch arrives. That is the intervention that protects root function before the stress begins, rather than trying to reverse damage that is already accumulated. It takes 15 minutes. It is almost certainly the highest return action available to your garden right now. There is also a difference worth knowing between a plant in survival mode and a plant in actual decline. Survival mode is temporary and fully recoverable. Decline means the stress has compounded to the point where the plant cannot redirect. A plant moving back toward health shows new growth at the tips within a few days of the right intervention. Small, but visible. Leaves that were dull begin showing surface tension again. Flower buds that were stalling start to develop. A plant in true decline shows none of this. Leaves yellow from the bottom upward and continue to do so. New growth stalls entirely. The plant loses mass steadily rather than holding it. Knowing which situation you are in changes the response entirely. A recovering plant needs steady support. A declining plant sometimes needs to be removed before it draws pest pressure into the plants around it. If this changed how you see July, the next video covers what to do week by week through the rest of summer. Each intervention timed to where the plants actually are, not where the calendar says they should be. Subscribe so you see it when it drops. Every gardener who has ever watched a July garden decline while doing everything right has been solving the right problem with the wrong tool. More water into a compromised delivery system. More attention to leaves that are responding to heat, not actual distress. More effort aimed at symptoms while the actual cause. Soil temperature, root function, the productive shutdown nobody warned them about, continues building underneath. The garden that makes it through July intact is not the one that gets more water. It is the one whose roots were protected before the heat arrived, whose soil temperature stayed inside the range where delivery keeps working, whose gardener stopped looking at the surface and started asking what was happening 6 inches below it. There is a version of July that feels like a battle. 4 weeks of reacting to problems that keep coming faster than you can solve them. And there is a version of July that feels like harvest season building momentum, where the decisions made in late June are paying off in exactly the ways you intended. The difference between those two experiences is not talent. It is not luck. It is not better soil or better weather. It is understanding what is actually happening to your plants when the heat arrives and responding to the cause rather than the symptom. July is not the enemy. It is a test of decisions that were made in June and a chance to make different ones before August. Your plants are already telling you where they are. The question is whether you are asking them the right questions.